History of relations between elected officials and the Muslim community. The history of relations between elected officials and the Muslim community in France, as in other Western countries, is marked by a complex evolution, often marked by tensions. After the end of colonization, particularly with waves of immigration from former colonies, France saw its Muslim population multiply. This community, which today represents a significant part of the population, was initially perceived as a marginal group. In the 1980s and 1990s, debates around the Muslim presence in France intensified, particularly with the rise of Islam in the public space. At first, relations between Muslims and political leaders were relatively cordial. However, as Muslims became more involved in society and asserted their rights, elected officials began to perceive some of these aspects as a threat to national unity. The wearing of the Islamic veil, requirements related to halal food, or prayer times in public places were quickly perceived as signs of confrontation between the Muslim community and French secular society. It was from the 2000s onwards that this tension took on particular proportions, particularly after the attacks of September 11, 2001, which exacerbated fears linked to Islam and fundamentalism. Over the years, several laws and political decisions have been put in place, often in a climate of suspicion towards Muslims. Among the most significant, the Veil Law of 2004. It banned the wearing of conspicuous religious symbols, including the Islamic veil, in public schools. This law, although it aims to guarantee secularism, was widely perceived by the Muslim community as an attack on their religious freedom. Many Muslim women have felt stigmatized and excluded from the education system for simply wanting to express their faith. The 2010 law prohibiting the concealment of the face in public spaces. Although the law aims to ban niqabs and burqas, it has been seen by many Muslims as an attack on religious freedom and a stigmatization of Muslim women. Some elected officials justified this law by the fight against extremism, but for the Muslim community, this was perceived as a new form of isolation and rejection. Debates around the law against separatism, 2021. This law, which claims to combat separatist threats, has generated numerous concerns within the Muslim community. Although the law is supposed to target radical Islamism, it has been interpreted as an indirect attack on Muslim religious practice as a whole. Measures such as control of associations, closure of mosques, and restrictions on foreign funding have exacerbated the feeling of ostracism. Street prayer bans. In some cities, street prayers, particularly during Ramadan, have been banned due to the occupation of public spaces. Although these bans are justified by reasons of security and public tranquility, they have been seen as a way of putting pressure on the religious practice of Muslims. Elected officials, rather than seeking solutions that take into account the needs of believers, have often opted for a policy of restriction. Reactions from elected officials. The declarations and actions of certain elected officials, whether local or national, have also contributed to the image of a rejection of the Muslim community. Political speeches, particularly during election periods, have sometimes taken particularly hostile or accusatory turns. Discourses of stigmatization. Some elected officials, particularly during debates on security and integration, have designated Islam as a threat to the values of the Republic. Statements such as those of former President Nicolas Sarkozy, who spoke of the need to reconcile France with its Christian roots, suggested that Islam was not compatible with the nation's fundamental values. This type of discourse has reinforced the divide between Muslims and political authorities. The example of certain municipalities. Several mayors of small towns or large cities have adopted hostile policies towards Muslims. For example, some have refused the construction of mosques under the pretext of preserving secularism, while others have banned street prayers or pressured Muslims to respect certain practices that go against their beliefs. These actions, far from bringing communities together, have exacerbated the feeling of rejection of Muslims by institutions. The attitude of certain elected officials towards police violence. Events like the demonstrations against police violence, where Muslims mobilized, saw some elected officials downplay the problems of discrimination against minorities, particularly young Muslims in the suburbs. In response, elected officials have sometimes taken positions in defense of the police without taking into account the context of social tension and the systemic discrimination experienced by certain Muslims. Insufficient responses to Islamophobia. Some elected officials have also shown a lack of will to firmly condemn Islamophobia when it is evident in society. While anti-Muslim acts, such as attacks or desecration of mosques, have increased, institutional responses have sometimes seemed timid, reinforcing the perception that the Muslim community was not a priority for elected officials. The Muslim community in France and other European countries has reacted strongly and visibly to public policies and the attitudes of elected officials who seem to ignore or disregard its rights and beliefs. This frustration manifests itself through various means of expression, ranging from public demonstrations to more discreet but equally determined actions. First of all, numerous demonstrations took place to protest against laws perceived as discriminatory, in particular the law on the veil of 2004 or the law prohibiting the concealment of the face in public spaces. These gatherings, often organized by Muslim associations or human rights groups, aim to denounce what they consider to be systematic stigmatization of their community. These mobilizations are sometimes accompanied by slogans calling for equality, freedom of conscience, and the fight against Islamophobia. Young Muslims, particularly in working-class neighborhoods, feel a deep sense of injustice, and many turn to these protests as a way to assert their identity and denounce exclusion. In parallel with these demonstrations, more diplomatic actions were carried out. Many Muslim personalities, intellectuals and community leaders have written op-eds, participated in public debates, and even challenged political leaders to make the voice of the community heard. These actions aim to denounce measures perceived as unfair, but also to explain that Muslims do not seek to contest Republican principles, but rather to assert their right to practice their faith without being discriminated against. However, these efforts have not always led to concrete results, which has increased the anger of some members of the community. Many Muslims feel reduced to second-class citizens, forced to constantly defend themselves against attacks they consider unfounded. This feeling of rejection is all the more acute when elected officials themselves seem to play a role in this stigmatization. Anger is fueled by the feeling of being invisible in public policies, despite their active participation in society. Calls for justice. Faced with this marginalization, Muslim organizations and human rights collectives have intensified their calls for justice and equality. These groups denounce systemic discrimination against Muslims, both at the institutional level and in daily life. They campaign for political authorities to recognize Islamophobia as a form of racism and take concrete measures to remedy it. Associations such as the Human Rights League, the CCIF, Collective Against Islamophobia in France, and the UOIF, Union of Islamic Organizations of France, have regularly denounced the abuses of government policy towards Muslims. These organizations have organized petitions, media campaigns, and legal challenges to fight laws deemed discriminatory. For example, after the adoption of the 2010 law on the full veil, several of these organizations filed a complaint against the state, believing that this legislation went against the principles of religious freedom and fundamental rights. They also denounced verbal and physical violence of an Islamophobic nature, often minimized by the authorities. Calls for justice have also been heard internationally. International human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International, have highlighted the injustice faced by Muslims in France. These denunciations, which take the form of reports, press releases, and international demonstrations, aim to put pressure on the French state to respect its commitments in terms of human rights and to actively fight against all forms of discrimination. The importance of interreligious dialogue. Faced with this situation, several initiatives have been launched to promote interreligious dialogue and improve mutual understanding between elected officials, Muslims, and the rest of society. The objective is to break stereotypes, provide answers to misunderstandings, and open a space where all communities can coexist harmoniously. Interreligious dialogue, in France and elsewhere, has brought Muslim religious leaders closer to those of other faiths, particularly Christian and Jewish leaders. These meetings, often organized by public institutions, universities, or NGOs, aim to create bridges between communities, promote tolerance, and share common values of respect for human dignity. Local initiatives have also emerged, such as conferences, workshops, and forums where Muslims and non-Muslims can discuss their differences and find common ground. For example, certain municipalities have created interreligious reflection committees in which representatives of the Muslim community are invited to discuss with local elected officials. These discussion spaces make it possible to deconstruct prejudices and promote a climate of peace and cooperation. Other initiatives have taken the form of joint projects for society, where Muslims and non-Muslims collaborate on humanitarian or social causes. These actions show that, despite religious differences, there is potential for solidarity and mutual understanding. These approaches aim to prove that diversity can be a strength and not an obstacle for a just and egalitarian society. However, although these efforts are appreciable, they are often confronted with the rise of political and social polarization, which slows down the success of these constructive discussions. Elected officials, in certain cases, may be reluctant to engage in real dialogue with the Muslim community for fear of losing voters or appearing weak in the face of a part of the population that is hostile to Islam. Respect for others and justice in Islam. At the heart of the Islamic faith are fundamental principles that advocate respect for all human beings, regardless of their origin, belief, or social status. Islam emphasizes equality and human dignity, essential values which must guide interpersonal and social relationships. The Quran, the sacred text of Islam, frequently evokes the importance of justice and respect for others. In Surah 49, verse 13, it is written, "O mankind, we have created you from a male and a female, and we have made you peoples and tribes, that you may know one another. The noblest among you in the sight of God is the most pious." This verse emphasizes not only the unity of humanity, but also the idea that the diversity of peoples and cultures must be respected. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, also taught his disciples that respect for others, whatever their religion or origin, is essential. He declared, "He who has no compassion for others, God will not have mercy on him." This compassion and respect are values deeply rooted in Islam and guide the relationship of Muslims towards their fellow citizens, whatever their religious affiliation. Justice is also an essential value of Islam, which makes it an obligation for rulers and citizens. In Surah 4, verse 58, the Quran says, "Surely God commands you to return the deposits to their rightful owners, and when you judge between people, to judge with equity." This highlights the importance of acting justly in all aspects of life, including in the political sphere. The role of Muslims in society. Muslims have, throughout history, contributed significantly to society, whether in the economic, cultural, scientific, or political fields. In the past, during the Golden Age of Islam, Muslim civilizations such as the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and later the Ottomans played fundamental roles in the fields of philosophy, mathematics, medicine, cartography, and astronomy. Figures such as the scholar Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and the mathematician Al-Khwarizmi left a global legacy that influenced European and global thought. Today, Muslims continue to have considerable impact in various fields. Many Muslim scientists, artists, entrepreneurs, and intellectuals actively participate in the development of their respective countries and global society as a whole. They are also involved in humanitarian initiatives, promoting social justice, peace, and international solidarity. In the political realm, although Muslim engagement varies from country to country, many are actively involved in social and political movements, as voters and elected officials. In France, for example, representatives of the Muslim community are fighting for better political representation and to defend the rights of minorities. Muslims, far from being passive spectators, are key players in the construction of modern society, contributing to its diversity and dynamism. Islamic politics and respect for minorities. Islam, in its vision of politics and social justice, attaches great importance to respect for minorities and the protection of their rights. Islamic principles of governance advocate consultation, shura, and inclusiveness. The authorities are called to account and to work for the well-being of all, especially the most vulnerable. This translates into measures aimed at protecting the rights of minorities, whether religious, ethnic, or social. The classic Islamic political model, although different from the modern democratic system, is based on the idea that power must be exercised in the service of the common good, while respecting the rights of each individual. In the history of the Islamic